We want to ultimately put ourselves out of work. That's our ultimate goal. We look forward to the day when we're no longer needed, and malaria, which has been killing human beings for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, is no longer a problem. And we're closer now than we ever have been. As you're probably aware, over the last few years, we've been seeing the emergence of resistant parasites in a number of African countries, particularly in East Africa, but it seems to be spreading fairly fast. And so I guess the management of malaria is a bit like spinning plates. You develop something new and effective, it'll last for a period of time, but you always have to be one step ahead of the curve by developing newer products which are going to be effective when eventually the existing products do fail. We are involved with that, and we're working with pharma partners, including Novartis, to develop the next generation of medicines. But in the meantime, there's a lot you can do to protect the existing drugs which are out there. We're absolutely delighted that this has finally been approved, that Coartem baby is now a thing. We focus on developing novel antimalarials for unmet medical needs, and we try not to develop me toos. There's always something new about what we develop. And as you know, pregnant women, very young children are particularly vulnerable. And right until now, there's never been an antimalarial that's been specifically indicated for the very young kids. And that's left people at the sharp end with a real problem, because up till now, they've had to use the low doses of existing medications, which aren't approved for very young babies, and hope that they'll be okay. But there's been nothing else they can use. So this is filling that gap, and it's been a long time coming, but we're absolutely delighted that this is now an option.
I know you said using low dose of adult drugs, and I think if one of my earliest memories of how malaria is treated in a child is just if there is an adult tablet, they will not break it
Right.
and give a child that. Why is that not effective? Considering some people might just say, well, we've been giving our children 1/4 of a adult tablet and we've been using it.
No, that's a really good question. The problem with giving adult medication is really one of compliance. The palatability of medicines these days is absolutely crucial, and there's no excuse for giving children adult doses. One of the things that in your own experience you'll probably remember about adult tablets is that they are incredibly bitter in many cases. Young children, even older children, can spit them out, they can vomit, which means they're not getting the right dose. So these days, anybody wanting to develop a novel antimalarial has to make sure that it's palatable, that it tastes okay, they can be sweetened, the taste masking can be done. But the great thing about modern antimalarials for children is that they tend to be flavored, they're very acceptable, and they're in a low volume dispersible formulation, which makes it easier to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Coartem is not new to the African drug market. But there has been, I think, is one of the more if people can mention Coartem anti-malaria drugs much easily. So my question is, why did it take this long to have a unique pediatric formulation for children, considering how long ago Coartem has been in the African market?
Yeah, one of the problems is that newborns and small children are very often excluded from clinical trials, as are pregnant women for very good reasons. And so it's only been relatively recently that we've had the technology to supplement clinical trials with physiological-based pharmacokinetic modeling, which can, when you put them together, gives you the data you need on both efficacy and safety. So there's been this long-standing misconception amongst some people that maternal antibodies give quite long-lasting protection against malaria. And that's very likely to be the case for a month or so, but then it wears off fairly quickly. And we do see many cases with very young children suffering from malaria with nothing approved that can be given to treat that.
Okay, in terms of formulation, how has the formulation evolved beyond just the flavoring? If we can also talk about the active ingredients over the years, probably there's any evolution or any variation in the way malaria affects African children put into consideration in coming up with the formulation, not just the flavoring.
Yeah. So the issue, you mentioned Coartem earlier on, And this is far and away the most widely, or the molecule, which is a combination of artemether and lumefantrine, is by far the most widely used antimalarial in Africa. It accounts in most countries for 80% plus of all the antimalarials used. It's super effective. It's very well tolerated. Everybody is familiar with it. It's almost become the antimalarial version of the word Hoover when you're talking about vacuum cleaner. But the problem with giving regular Coartem for young children is that the young children metabolize drugs differently. They haven't got fully developed metabolic pathways. And so what that means is that there's a theoretical risk of overdosing with artemether, which potentially could lead to neurotoxic side effects. And so it was really important to develop a new formulation specifically intended for children that had a lower dose of artemether, but was equally effective, and that's what we've managed to do. And it's a dispersible formulation. It's easy to take, and it hopefully will be a game changer.
Yeah, talking of game changing, how much the impact do you expect this is going to be?
I think it's really important to have something available for these young children. If you compare the number of cases in neonates with the number of cases in older children and adults, part of the problem is it's very hard to quantify. We know that in Africa, there's probably around 30 million children born every year in malaria endemic areas, and every one of those is at risk. But we have this gap between when the maternal immunity wears off and when you can actually start using medications for older children. It's not a very big gap. It may be between 1 and 3 months in total. But in that time period, we know that there are many children that do get infected, and unfortunately, many of them die. So it is important. It's a game changer. Probably from a commercial perspective, isn't going to be a massive commercial product, but it's important to have it available. And that's actually one of the important things. It's being made available at essentially the same price as the existing products. It's not going to be more expensive, so it'll be affordable to national health systems, even though commercially we're not talking probably very huge volumes. It was a necessary thing to do to fill this gap in the market.
Yeah, then I think you're also going into an issue I'm interested in, which is the channel of distribution. So what are you currently considering, and if you can localize it to giving me examples of countries and their approach to distributing it?
Yeah, okay. So the manufacturer is Novartis, clearly one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, has a very well-developed distribution network in sub-Saharan Africa. It'll be distributed in the same way as Coartem dispersible, their existing antimalarial medications. So it shouldn't be a problem getting it to those who need it. And I know that Novartis have been planning for this launch for quite a while now. Initially, it'll be rolled out in 8 countries, the ones that took part in the Swissmedic MAG-HP procedure. And MAG-HP stands for Marketing Authorization for Global Health Products. And one of the really innovative things about this pathway is that it includes both WHO and countries in the review process. So within this particular process, there were 8 African countries that were involved, and at the end of the approval process, those 8 countries commit to approving at a local level within 90 days. So it's a pretty fast track approval at the end of the Swissmedic process.
Okay, thank you for this. And I think the Swissmedic process is also something that I'm curious to know about. So how does it differ from other regulatory processes, at least to the best of your knowledge?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there's a number of ways you can approve medicines for use at a local level in Africa. The reason that Swissmedic was chosen was because they have this very innovative approach of using both WHO input to review the data, but also including regulators from endemic countries as well. So they get a chance to have an early look at the data. They have a chance to ask questions and to be completely involved in the process. And what that means is that at the end of the approval process, those countries already know what it is they're dealing with. And it means they can go back and they can register very quickly in their own countries. And there is this 90-day set time period within which they have to do that.
Does this mean that other initiatives that MMV is involved with would also go through this regulatory process, or this is a one-off thing?
No, it's not a one-off thing. We've got a long relationship with Swissmedic. Obviously, being a Swiss-based organization, they're a local regulator. They're very committed to accelerating path to market for products for lower and middle income countries. And I think the MAG-HP process is a good example of that. So we've used them in the past. We've got a number of products coming in the pipeline that we're intending to work with them with as well. So it's a well-trodden path.
Okay, now let's talk about how malaria integrates into the bigger vision for MMV. So, in the bigger scale of things, from an organizational perspective, how does this help you deliver your set goals?
So our job at MMV is to develop effective, quality assured and affordable medicines for those that need them in malaria endemic countries. We work with medicines rather than vaccines because there are other people who are experts in that field, but we work across the spectrum. So for uncomplicated malaria, for severe malaria, for prophylaxis, I guess have fingers in pretty much every pie when it comes to the treatment of malaria. And as I mentioned earlier, we always try to look for unmet needs and for drugs that can be used in vulnerable populations. And we work with an amazing network of very innovative, very creative partners, both in research institutions, in universities, in pharmaceutical companies, to help us do that. Our model enables us to work with partners to deliver medicines quicker and less expensively than will be the case if it was done by a pharmaceutical company alone.
I don't want to leave anything to chance. How is this expected to be used?
Yeah, well, one of the great things about having a dispersible formulation, and particularly one that you can use with breast milk, is that you don't have to rely on a supply of fresh water, or at least not very much. Coatem dispersible, which was the formulation for older children, was successful partly because it tasted good, but also because it could be dissolved in a teaspoon, a very small volume, which is important for young children, and they found it palatable. And that's the same with the new Coatem baby.
I think one of the major issues around drugs would be resistance, and I know Quatem has been in the market for a long while, but looking at this as it's still a risk. So, what consideration to safe-proof these mechanism around the issue of resistance put into consideration?
That's one of our really big areas of interest at the moment. As you're probably aware, over the last few years, we've been seeing the emergence of resistant parasites in a number of African countries, particularly in East Africa, but it seems to be spreading fairly fast. And so I guess the management of malaria is a bit like spinning plates. You develop something new and effective, it'll last for a period of time, but you always have to be one step ahead of the curve by developing newer products which are going to be effective when eventually the existing products do fail. We are involved with that, and we're working with pharma partners, including Novartis, to develop the next generation of medicines. But in the meantime, there's a lot you can do to protect the existing drugs which are out there. I mentioned earlier on that artemether lumefantrine does account for about 80% plus of anti-malaria use in many countries. And that means that we have to protect it for as long as we can to squeeze as much out of it as possible. We're working on a number of programs to help do so. One is through the deployment of multiple first-line treatments, which means that in a country or a population, you use more than two or more first-line drugs to relieve the pressure on just one single drug on its own, and you can rotate those. That has been shown, certainly in the modeling studies, to be very effective at slowing down the emergence and spread of resistance and maintaining the efficacy of existing drugs for much, much longer. And then there's other things you can do, like putting together an existing drug with a second partner molecule, which can help protect it for longer as well. We're working on a number of projects to develop these. So the good news is the antimalarial pipeline has never been stronger. There are a whole bunch of things coming along over the next few years, which are very exciting, look super effective in the studies so far. So we're in good shape. But clearly we need to be mindful of the fact that the funding environment is now even more restrictive than it ever has been. And so anything that comes through in the coming years has to be affordable. And we also work with our procurement partners, the donor organizations, to help make sure that's the case.
You mentioned that this would be provided through the regular distribution channels that anti-malaria drugs are being provided. And we have countries that offer free anti-malaria treatment. And I think for this particular demography of interest for this intervention, this could be actually a drug candidate that may not actually be one that will be extensively sold. In the light of the current funding landscape evolving, where do you expect countries that are providing free treatment for their children to be able to afford this? Are there funding considerations in addition to implementation?
Yeah, no, there's a number of points there. The first point is that the majority of this product will be used, I think, in the public sector. And in sub-Saharan Africa, until recently, there were two main procurers, which you'll be aware of. One is the Global Fund, and the other one was the President's Malaria Initiative in the US. Now, unfortunately, PMI has pretty much been disbanded now. So Global Fund is there to take up some of the slack. They can't do all that by themselves. But the good news is there are two things. One is that the price of this new product is not going to be any more expensive than the existing one, which is already pretty affordable. And the second thing is, as I mentioned earlier on, we're not talking huge volumes here. So with a number of very young children who are expected to need this, it's not going to make a big impact on national budgets.
Most of these 8 countries are also introducing malaria vaccines, or they've already introduced malaria vaccines, and they're targeting the same age group that these drugs is designed for. What insights can you share about co-rolling out both vaccines and this pediatric formulation?
No, it's a great question. So vaccines are going to be a really important part of the mix, particularly in the next few years. Right now, there are 2 malaria vaccines, which is fantastic news. There's a whole bunch of additional ones currently in development and coming through the pipeline fairly soon. What I think is important is that we have as many tools in the box as possible. There are always going to be supply issues, cost issues. Right now, I know the funding for the vaccines is under some debate, unfortunately. Vaccines are going to become an increasingly important part of the mix as their availability expands and as new, less expensive ones come along. In the meantime, there's always going to be a need for treatments as well as vaccines. And so for the foreseeable future, I think we're going to see these 2 different interventions used side by side.
What are your metrics for success? What goals, what ambitious impact targets have you set for this initiative?
Yeah, well, the primary metric, of course, is life saved. That's always going to be the most important thing for us, reducing mortality and morbidity. And right now we have a tool that will help us do that in a way we haven't been able to before in young children. So we will be monitoring that as this drug gets rolled out, and we really hope it's going to make a significant difference.
What are the early feedbacks that you are getting from the government that you are partnering, and probably what about other African countries in addition to these 8 countries?
Yeah, the feedback so far has been really exciting. Everybody is very happy that finally there's this first drug that's approved for this very young age group. I think there's a huge amount of enthusiasm. I think most endemic countries will be taking this up for sure because there's nothing else they can be using. After these initial 8, I know that Novartis are planning a rollout in the rest of the endemic countries in sub-Saharan Africa. It takes a little bit longer for those countries that didn't go through the MAG-HP process, but across 2026 into 2027, I think we can expect to see this rolled out in pretty much all malaria endemic countries.
Do you know how long it took for these drug to be developed?
Gosh, I've been working on this project for it must be 5 or 6 years now, but the thinking behind it started way before that. Developing any new drug takes a long time, as I'm sure you know. A typical pharma product can take 10 years from the concept to actually getting out to patients. We can accelerate that process up to a point, and in public health that does tend to be the case because we're not bound by commercial limitations or motivations. That can also help speed things up too.
If you look at what happened during COVID, we had vaccine in 1 year, around 1 year. And so I was thinking of for a disease like malaria and the importance of this drug, we could have had it much quicker. So would you blame this on prioritization or just the system?
Well, this is my personal view. My personal view is that when you have a disease that affects developed countries as well as perhaps developing countries, there magically seems to be more money available to come up with something to deal with it. And I think COVID was a great example of that. But as you said, COVID was a super example of what can happen when bright people put their minds to it and when there's a real push supported by governments. You can develop drugs very quickly, ones that are effective and safe. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily always the case with lower volume drugs for lower and middle income countries. That doesn't make it right, but I think it has been a fact of life to some extent in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with this. Any last remarks for me?
I think this is a really exciting time to be working in the field of malaria. Despite a lot of challenges, and you mentioned some of them, for example, the reduction in funding, the emergence of resistance, there's a lot of stuff going on that's very, very encouraging. A lot of new products in the pipeline, both from the vaccine perspective, from the medications perspective, the really vulnerable groups that we need to help support, the pregnant women, the very young children, are starting to see drugs developed specifically with them in mind. So that's really encouraging. And as we look ahead towards the possibility of supporting elimination, we've just seen one more country, actually in the last few weeks, confirmed Suriname has been eliminated, which is super encouraging. We want to ultimately put ourselves out of work. That's our ultimate goal. We look forward to the day when we're no longer needed, and malaria, which has been killing human beings for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, is no longer a problem. And we're closer now than we ever have been.
Thanks, Adam. I really enjoyed this conversation, and congratulations to your team. And yeah, thanks very much. This has been
great talking to you. Thank you. Bye.